Elie Wiesel said, "To forget a Holocaust is to kill twice." World War II claimed the lives of over 50 million people. Over 6 million Jews were persecuted and murdered in a 6-year period. No master list of those perished exists anywhere in the world. All that's left is memory.
So, in 1933, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party came to power in Germany. And when they came to power in January of 1933, they began a slow and steady process of basically trying to remove Jews from German political life, from social life, from cultural life, essentially turning Jews into second-class citizens of Germany. Now, the Nazi plan initially, when they came to power in Germany, was to basically make Germany pure, free for the Aryan race, and purify it, removing Jews from German society. Over the course of the 1930s, as Nazi policies and edicts and legislation steadily made life worse and worse for Jews in Germany, more and more Jews tried to emigrate out from Germany. About half of the Jews who were living in Germany, there were about 500,000 Jews in Germany when the Nazis came to power in 1933, managed to leave. But that meant that there were another half, approximately 200,000, who were still in Germany in 1939. Over the course of the 1930s, and especially in 1938, the Germans began to expand the size of their empire, the size of the Nazi state. They annexed Austria in March of 1938, and then they also expanded to take over parts of Czechoslovakia as well. In the summer of 1939, the German state and the Nazis, the Third Reich, began to cast their vision for expanding territory in the direction of Poland to the east. And when they invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, that is looked on as the official beginning date of World War II. The invasion of Poland began in September of 1939. Much to the surprise of many observers all over the world, the Nazis had negotiated a secret pact with the Soviet Union, a non-aggression pact, to not go to war against each other. And so when the Germans invaded Poland in September of 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union partitioned Poland, split it into two, and Poland effectively ceased to exist. Half was occupied by the Germans, the other half was occupied by the Soviet Union. For the first 2 years of the war, from 1939 until 1941, Germany and the Soviet Union were not fighting each other until Germany invaded the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941. And for many observers, that the first 2 years of the war, Jews who had been living in Poland had been concentrated into ghettos where they were forced to live in residential concentrations. German Nazi edicts increasingly made life more miserable for the Jews living in the ghettos, but the invasion of the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941 marked a real turning point in Nazi treatment of the Jews under German occupation. That was what was happening in Eastern Europe.
In 1941, Ted Veling was 9 years old when the Germans invaded his home in Hilversum, Holland. Just a few miles from Amsterdam, the Nazis occupied Hilversum because of its natural tree barrier. Over the next 3 years, Ted and a group of young boys worked together to help their neighborhood survive. This is his story of resistance and heroism.
So the Germans came into Holland in May of 1940. By January of 1941, every single Jew living in Holland was required to register. There were about 150,000 Jews living in Holland in 1941. Included in there were about 25,000 Jews who were refugees, who had escaped from Germany, come to Holland in the 1930s. They'd come to Holland because they thought that they would be safe there from Nazi policy. Little did they know that the Germans would invade Holland.
Germany, without the declaration of war, invaded Holland. And Hilversum was known for having all the radio stations right in the city. So the first thing that the Germans bombed was all of the radio stations. I was a very good sleeper at that time. I woke up in the morning, all the glass was out of the windows, and Mom and Dad were cleaning up the glass from my bed and from all over the floor. I slept through the whole thing. That was the last time for a while that I slept that soundly. Once the Germans started bombing Rotterdam and took out the entire center of the city, we gave up the war, and after five days, the royal family fled to England, and so did most of the government, and became a government in exile. There was a Dutch Nazi party called the Brown Shirts, and they became the new government. The head of that party was a Mr. Mussert, so all of the brown shirts were known as Musserts. And things went along fairly smooth for a while. We all had to get identification. The Germans insisted that every Jewish person wear a Star of David on all their clothes. We all thought it would be fun to confuse them and all wear the Star of David. But after being caught a few times by the brown shirts and getting beaten up, it wasn't so much fun anymore. The German guards really were pretty atrocious. Right in the beginning of the war, they taught us a lesson about what would happen if we did things that they didn't like. Somebody cut some of the phone wires from one German headquarters to another German headquarters. So they took 5 gentlemen at random, brought them to the center of the city. Then they took us out of school and made us watch while they shot these 5 people at what seemed to be about a 5-minute interval each. I learned to hate at age 9.
Jewish people were deported to killing centers and work camps. Those selected to die were sent directly into gas chambers. Non-Jews in occupied cities realized more Jews began disappearing every day. Hope for the Allies' liberation changed to despair. The question wasn't about when the Allies would get there. It was, would they make it in time?
For those who had survived or those who were liberated, either from concentration camps, a lot of the Jews who had managed to survive were liberated from concentration camps in Germany, specifically camps like Buchenwald and Dachau, and many of the Dutch Jews had been taken to Bergen-Belsen, where they were liberated by the British. You have to imagine a scenario where large parts of Europe are destroyed. Cities are in rubble. Towns are destroyed, buildings are destroyed, houses are destroyed, entire families are destroyed. And so when the war comes to an end, the first instinct for those who have managed to survive is to try to find out, has anyone from my family survived? Is anyone still alive? Slowly after the war, the United States begins to change its immigration policy. So some people are able to get here after the war ends in 1946. You begin to see the first DPs, displaced persons, coming to America. 1950, you see even more beginning to come as the United States changes its laws. And so people had to deal with building new lives while coming to terms with what they had lost. And under these circumstances, people came to America. They were new Americans, and they tried to, blend in, tried to assimilate, tried to Americanize, tried to learn the language. At the same time, trying to do their best to memorialize what had happened to their families, to remember those who had been destroyed.
Some of my girlfriends, when we had lunch together, said, "You were a survivor? How come you never told us?" We were taught not to talk about it. And I said, "Well, what would you like me to do? When we have a party, would you like me to say, hey, by the way?" We kept it to ourselves.
When I came, and not only I, when all of us came at that point, we were all told, forget what happened, we don't want to hear, don't talk about it.
In 1945, Allied forces liberated concentration camps. The full scope of Nazi horrors were exposed to the world. Survivors of the camps faced long and difficult roads to recovery.
What's interesting is that survivors will tell you that amongst themselves, they talked about what happened. They shared their experiences. They formed groups of people from the same towns, or people who had been to the same ghettos, or people who had been in the same camps. And these were like support groups where they, had memorial services with each other. But the feeling was that those who were not there, the Americans, both Jewish and non-Jewish, weren't really interested in hearing about their experiences.
They're not making up for me not having a normal life, for me not getting an education, and for me not having a teenage or a childhood or anything else. This is what I cannot forgive. Be tolerant and go by the individual people and not by what's told, and use their own mind on how to behave and how to act. This is basically what I'm trying to get across.
What exactly?
I mean, will you give your forgiveness to those German people?
That was one of the hardest things. I could forgive them for what they had done to our family. We had lost a lot of money. We had lost a lot of weight. He had been ill. And I could forgive them for that. The one thing I could not forgive was what they had done to the Jewish people. And I still feel that's a privilege that should solely be given to the Jewish people.
Any other questions?